Hello everyone, and welcome back to the EDHRECast. I'm Matt Morgan. I'm joined by my good friend who I asked him what his favorite 90s band was, if he was actually sure about it. He said, no doubt. It's Dana Roach.
My son actually came in the room the other day when I was listening to music like on my TV, and so it had like a picture on Spotify up of the bands I was listening to, and he actually says, like, how come every band you listen to looks like a screenshot from the Canadian Office cast? Which is maybe the meanest thing he's ever said to me, and it was 100% accurate. I think I was listening to Broken Social Scene, and it was just like a bunch of mid-40-year-old white guys who look like accountants. He was dead accurate.
It was the meanest, but also the most correct thing he's ever said in his life. So
perfectly savage, yes.
Awesome. Well, Dana, I'm glad that we're here. Joey's not here with us this week, but you and I are, and we have a really good topic, actually, something that we've been talking about a lot lately. So what is it that we're going to talk about this week on the episode?
Play this, not that. Basically, like what cards you could replace your game changers with in your deck if you're trying to, control the power or keep it at a different bracket.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of just ebbs and flows, I feel like, too, with all the game changers, all this bracket stuff that's kind of been in that beta phase. So we want to take a minute and just make sure folks know what options are out there if you don't want to be playing all these game changers, especially if you're trying to keep it in bracket 2. But before we get into the main topic, we got a couple quick shout outs we got to do first.
We are excited to be teamed up with Dragon Shield, our favorite maker of magic sleeves and deck products. They just released a new line of dragon-themed sleeves, and they also updated their MTG Card Manager app as well, which you can find for both iOS and Android by searching for Dragon Shield. MTG Card Manager makes it easy to check prices for trades, to track your Magic the Gathering collection's value and stats, and to instantly translate foreign language cards and find Oracle texts and rulings. The perfect companion app for MTG. Manage your cardboard treasures like a dragon.
And if you would like to support the show, there's a whole bunch of ways you can do that. Then the biggest and easiest way is just subscribing on YouTube. Subscribe on your local podcast app to make sure you don't miss any episodes as they're coming out, because we have a lot of exciting content. But if you want to head over to patreon.com/EDHRECast, we've been releasing some patron exclusive content lately, and we're super excited for it. And you can only view it over at patreon.com/EDHRECast. And it's just a great way to get yourself a little something extra in exchange for supporting us over on Patreon. And there's not just content over there. You can join our Discord community. You can see all of our historic challenge stats picks, all that and more over at patreon.com/EDHRECast, including the tier where we're going to give a very special shout out to one lucky patron just for supporting us. And this week, we're going to give a very special shout out to Stephen Howard the Duck. And sorry, just Stephen Howard, but Howard the Duck, the overlap is right there. It was too easy. I'm sorry, Stephen, but it was just, like I said, just too easy to do.
I was wondering what you were going to go with there, because it's like Stephen Howard. I didn't know where you're going.
It's also a member of the cast from the Canadian Office.
That's true. So, there we go. Yes, there we go.
But either way, Stephen, we definitely appreciate your support over on Patreon. So with all that out of the way, Dana, game changers. Not everybody wants to play them. Some people want to kind of regulate their decks down a little bit. Where should we even start with this conversation?
Yeah, and this is tricky because, like, they're game changers, right? There's any replacement is going to definitionally be not as powerful as whatever you are putting in that slot. And there's some cards that just don't have a perfect, like, even a weaker version of them. So none of these will be a perfect 1v1 replacement, obviously. But there are cards out there that you can run that'll get you a chunk of the way there with what you're trying to do. And we want to throw a few of those options out there if you're someone who, wants to power your deck down, or maybe your deck felt like it was a bracket 3 and a couple of the new game changers bumped it up to a 4. And you're like, man, it doesn't play as a 4. Like, I need to remove something to get it back down to a 3 where it's more comfortable. So we're going to give you a couple options here, things you can swap in to maybe fix that problem.
Yeah, I've been having this conversation a lot, and I feel like you, especially where you seem to like to play is just under that bracket 3 level deck. You still want to play powerful decks, but sometimes you want to get into that bracket 2 because you're not trying to win off of one specific card, maybe, which game changers definitely can do that. But I've been doing that when I've been going through my own decks too, trying to make sure that, well, I want to get these powerful effects, but I don't want to do the most brain dead sometimes as it feels to me, but just the default best version of a card. And there's a ton of options. It's Commander. There's always ways, like you said, to get a chunk of the effect, even if you're not playing that specific card. So we're going to go through a bunch of game changers here and just give some options that you can fit in if you're trying to maybe find substitutes for these game changers, trying to regulate your power down a little bit. There's just so many ways that you can do this, and we just want to give a full episode to talking about all this.
So I think the first one here we'll talk about is Enlightened Tutor. It's a 1 mana instant speed to search for an artifact or an enchantment card and put it on top of your library. A lot of 1 mana tutors popped up on the list that weren't already there, and there were a lot of them that were already there. If this is a card in your deck and you've just found yourself in a bracket you don't want to be at, or you want to replace it for some other reason, there are a few things that kind of get you there. The first one is probably Idyllic Tutor. It's 2 and a white, and it's a sorcery speed. But you can search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, and put it in your hand. It's at the top of your library. So it doesn't take up your next draw. You don't have that window where someone can interfere with you getting it by doing something to your library. That's a pretty solid card, and it didn't see a lot of play for a lot of years because it hadn't had a reprint. It was like a $40 to $50 card for a long time.
It was super expensive,
Yeah, until that Theros reprint a couple years back. It's not a 1v1 swap, but that's a pretty solid card if you are playing in white and want an enchantment tutor.
One thing too I want to keep people encouraged on is Enlightened Tutor. A fault that I've always had when I'm playing Enlightened Tutor is it puts a card on top of your library. Idyllic Tutor, and then if you want to double Idyllic Tutor, Plea for Guidance is 6 mana to just get 2 enchantments. But those put the card into your hand, so they're not as bad of a top deck as Enlightened Tutor can be in real bad situations. I really don't mind either of these because the fact is, yes, they're sorcery speed, but it's getting a card to your hand that you can play that turn. So the fact that Enlightened Tutor is such a bad top deck in desperate times, I don't mind this. And I've actually been trying to find some swaps for Enlightened Tutor because I have a bracket. It feels like a bracket 3 deck, but with the changes to the game changers, I have to cut some game changers out to get down to the 3 game changer limit. And so Idyllic Tutor for Enlightened Tutor is just a perfect swap for me.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not downplaying how strong Enlightened Tutor is.
It's absolutely strong. All these cards are powerful.
Absolutely. But it's functionally turning the top card of your library that you are going to draw into the card you're tutoring up versus Idyllic Tutor where you still get to draw a card and you get to put that card into your hand. So the gap is maybe a little smaller than it looks like if you don't really think about what Enlightened Tutor is doing. The gap here is obviously big, but not as big as it is somewhere else. And there's also cards like Moonblessed Cleric that's also 3 mana, and when it enters, search your library for an enchantment card and put it on top as well. It goes on top again here, but it's a creature, so there's blink options, especially in white. Makes it much more reusable than Enlightened Tutor.
Yeah, Moonblessed Cleric, I know there's some combo decks from way back in the day that used to play it, and it's certainly powerful if you need a way to reanimate, get this effect. And like you said, flickering, there's all sorts of play around Moonblessed Cleric to make sure you're getting an Enlightened Tutor effect, but you're getting more than just a one-time thing. If you're not looking for just the pure mana efficiency, honestly, Enlightened Tutor might be the easiest one to replace out of all these. Now, we haven't addressed that Enlightened Tutor is looking for an artifact, not just an enchantment. So that is a piece, but there's also a ton of artifact tutors out there. If you're looking for equipment, there's a million equipment tutors out there. So there's definitely ways that you can replace Enlightened Tutor and just what it's doing specifically in ways that sometimes are more abusable or just more handy.
Why don't we go to the one maybe actually might have probably should have started with, which was Cyclonic Rift. I mean, maybe the card that, aside from Sol Ring, I think people maybe most associate with Commander.
Probably,
And I mean, it's nothing replaces Cyclonic Rift. It is a backbreaking card, instant speed, 7 mana, return all non-land permanents you don't control to their owner's hand. End of turn Rift is devastating and has won, maybe as many games as Crater Hoof has over the years. It's a ridiculous card. But
it's in 750,000 decks for a reason.
Yeah. But there's cards that kind of can, do a similar thing. If you still want that effect, there's stuff that gets you there. First of all, the ones that mostly deal with creatures on the attack step that I like, I'm a fan of Aetherize and Aether Spouts. 4 mana for Aetherize, 5 for Aether Spouts. Return all attacking creatures or owner's hand in the case of Aetherize, and Aether Spouts puts them on top or the bottom of the owner's library. It's not dealing with the permanents in play, but both those cards are pretty devastating too.
There's a ton of reasons to want to not play Cyclonic Rift. I would say 40 of them because that's the going price of Cyclonic Rift. And there are so many budget replacements that I love. When I had my Krakens and Sea Monsters deck out there, Whelming Wave was a perfect substitute because it hit everything except for my creatures. It was bouncing all the creatures out there that all my opponents had. And yes, there is a downside because Cyclonic Rift hits all non-land permanents, so it's going to bounce planeswalkers, artifacts, enchantments. If somebody has a million tokens out there for something like treasure tokens, Cyclonic Rift is a great way to get rid of those. There's obviously, like we said, there's not a one-for-one replacement, but stuff like Engulf the Shore, if you need an instant speed version of Cyclonic Rift, Engulf the Shore does an amazing job. It's 4 mana, 3 and a blue for an instant that says return to their owner's hands all creatures with toughness less than or equal to the number of islands you control. If you have 6 islands out there, you're probably going to hit a majority of the battlefield and make sure you're not dying. You're bouncing that scary army. There's such a huge amount of ways you can get around the Cyclonic Rift tax of just paying a bunch, you're playing a game changer, and get a powerful effect that's going to save you from dying and win you games.
I mean, if you don't want to worry about the number of islands in play, if you just want to hit everything, regardless of the mana value, Evacuation gets you there at instant speed for 4 mana as well.
The
advantage of Engulf the Shore is like, you might be playing in a deck where you are going to have creatures that won't get hit by it, but if you're not in one of those decks, Evacuation gets the job done as well. And there's 2 sorcery speed older cards that I like. Washout, return all permanents to chosen color to their owner's hand. So this hits all permanents, not just creatures. And, sure, occasionally you'll be in a game where like everyone's playing blue and it's not going to do much good. But like if you're in a mono blue deck, odds are it's going to generate way more value than the 4 mana you're spending just like bouncing all the green player stuff and all the red player stuff and whatever. And Inundate, I think, in mono blue does a lot of good too. 3 and trip blue, return all non-blue creatures to their owner's hands. So like in a blue deck, it's just going to hit a lot of creatures and not touch your stuff as well. So again, it's not Rift, but like it can do a lot of work.
Yeah, I think the only other option that jumps out to me as worth giving an immediate look at is Displacement Wave. That's X blue for sorcery. Return all non-land permanents with converted mana cost X or less to their owner's hands. So it is a good way. It does get mana intensive to cast that for enough to replace it. But again, if you're bouncing everything 5 or less, that's the same mana value as Cyclonic Rift anyways. So there's a bunch of options, and there's been a ton of these that have been coming out in new sets too. So this is just the ones that come to mind immediately. That's not even to consider all the other mass bounce effects we've been getting recently too.
Yeah. Well, what's the next card here we want to look at, Matt, that we're looking for replacements for?
Well, I feel the next one, we just need to get this out of the way because we're talking about cards that everybody dreads seeing Cyclonic Rift. Naturally, just go into Teferi's Protection. That's the one, 2 and a white. Until your next turn, your life total can't change. You gain protection from everything and permanents you control phase out. And then you exile Teferi's Protection. This one, actually, I know that everybody hates seeing this. I think the gap between Teferi's Protection and some of the cards we're going to talk about is actually way smaller than people want to make it out to be. Teferi's Protection is the best in class, but there's a lot of really, really good options in this class specifically.
There are, but they only do, at least in my mind, they only do half of what Teferi's Protection does. The beauty of Protection is it either can be a fog, kind of like by phasing you out of the game and keeping you from taking any damage from whatever alpha strike is happening, or some kind of a exsanguinate kind of effect or whatever it is, or you can use it to save all of your stuff from getting blown out. Like in those feel in games like 2 very different things. And there's a lot of cards that when was looking at a replacement do one half of it but don't do the other, and I could never decide which half I liked more because I found I used both halves a lot.
I mean, so I see what you're saying. I'm going to raise you Flare of Fortitude. This is a card that we've been talking about lately. I feel
is very good.
Flare of Fortitude has blown me away so much lately. It's 2 white for an instant that says you may sacrifice a non-token white creature rather than pay the spell's mana cost. So it is a way that you can cast it for free. Teferi's Protection doesn't have that option. And until end of turn, your life total can't change. And then permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible. So they don't phase out, but they do get a way to go around a board wipe, while also, you're open to blocking the next turn, stuff like that. But it does have that fog effect on there. There's a lot that I think, especially being able to cast it for free. You're not going to get a Teferi's Protection for free ever, but getting just enough of a Teferi's Protection with the upside of you can sacrifice a non-token white creature, that is such a powerful sneaky effect, because you can tap out and then cast this, and you're going to catch so many people off guard.
Yeah, and even if it's not like a creature that you like think of as being expendable, even if it's a valuable creature, that's still a lot of times worth doing in a lot of situations. Even if you save 3 or 4 other creatures and lose one, decent one, that's a perfectly fine price to pay plenty often.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I like Dawn's Truce quite a bit. It's White's heroic intervention. You and permanents you control gain hexproof to end of turn, and if the gift was promised, permanents you control gain indestructible as well. And the gift is you're just letting a person draw a card. And to give your stuff indestructible and hexproof with that option of giving up 1 card for 2 mana, Dawn's Truce is really, really solid.
I know everybody's really high on Dawn's Truce. The community loves it. I'm not as big on it as you are, or as just the community at large. I don't know why. Giving an opponent a card, I know you're not afraid of it. I am for some reason. I get mentally, I can't get over that. A card that I like also in that same vein, Clever Concealment. You'll notice that I love these types of cards that you can effectively cast without any mana. Yeah. Same as Flare of Fortitude, but Clever Concealment is same cost. It's 2 white for an instant, but it has Convoke, so you can tap the creatures that you control to help assist with paying for those mana costs. But then just any number of non-land permanents you control phase out. So it can't protect your lands if somebody casts an Armageddon, like Teferi's Protection can, but still, somebody casts a board wipe, phase everything out, you cast it for free. Surprising people with these, it's such a powerful effect that for some reason, it's made such a huge impact in every game that I've cast, whereas I would have had 3 mana up for Teferi's Protection. I would have had to change the way that I played out a lot of these different turns. And so being able to cast these spells for free, especially when you're playing an aggro deck, is incredibly valuable.
And the fact that they phase out dodges things like Rift as well that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get around with just indestructible or hexproof. And we just got a reprint of this card. It had got up, had climbed up in price a little bit. We're getting a reprint in the Final Fantasy set with a fantastic bit of art.
The art is
Final
amazing.
Fantasy VII. Yeah. Unbelievable. So,
you may not know this, but Cloud is in the art on Clever Concealment on the reprints. Nobody will ever catch that in the arts, but he is there.
Such a great little callback to the game for sure.
Yeah,
the other one I want to mention here, particularly if you find yourself using the fog portion a lot, there's a couple different fogs in white. Holy Day comes to mind. I like Dawn Charm a lot. Has a couple different modes. You can prevent all combat damage will be dealt this turn, so you can use the fog portion of it. You can regenerate a target creature, which can be relevant pretty often. You can counterspell the target's you. All 3 of those modes are pretty useful. And I'm just generally a fan of Dawn Charm. It doesn't do everything Rift does, but there are times that it can save you in ways Rift can as well.
Yeah, it's a super flexible card. There's a lot of value into having different modes. And sometimes you're going to have a need for any given mode in there. So there's a lot that I really, really think is super, super powerful with Dawn Charm.
I mean, since we're talking about groan-worthy white cards, Smothering Tithe probably is even more groan-inducing than Teferi's Protection.
Naturally next up on that list, yeah.
Yeah. It's basically a White's Rhystic Study. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player must pay 2, and if they don't, you create a treasure token.
Seems good.
I mean, it's, ridiculously good.
Seems good. I mean, I think there's 2 cards that come to mind as ways that you can at least... Maybe not as efficiently as Smothering Tithe, but they do keep you up with what the opponent's doing. The first one, Smuggler's Share, I know that was one that people had very, very high hopes for when it was first previewed, but then it kind of cooled off a little bit. But Smuggler's Share, 2 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, draw a card for each opponent who drew 2 or more cards this turn, then create a treasure token for each opponent who had 2 or more lands enter the battlefield under their control this turn. So it does get to happen once per turn. It's a little limited that it requires them to put a bunch of lands into play to get the mana versus drawing cards with Smothering Tithe. A new card, actually, that I'm very, very excited for, I'm anticipating putting this into several decks, is Taru, which is from the new Final Fantasy set. It's 1 and a white for a legendary dwarf advisor. It's an 0/3, and when Taru enters, you draw a card, and target opponent may draw a card. And then whenever an opponent draws a card, if it isn't that player's turn, you create a tapped treasure token. This ability triggers only once each turn. So there's still some ability there to catch up. Nothing is going to do it as efficiently as Smothering Tithe. And if they ever did anything that's even close to as efficiently, that's going to be a game changer immediately. That there should never be another Smothering Tithe, but at least you have some options. The thing I like about Taru, Dana, is it's 2 mana. It's going to come down super early. It's going to interact with everything that's going on. And the more that your opponents are doing, the more payoff you're going to get still. Just obviously not at such a ludicrous rate as Smothering Tithe, though.
And it's funny you mentioned that. I just played a game a week or 2 back where I had a Smuggler Share in hand. I was going to play against 3 green players, and I was convinced I was going to get all the value in the world. And literally the plays before me were like Nature's Lore pass, Cultivate pass, Kadama's Reach pass. I mean, I'm like, Smuggler Share, and then no one played a ramp spell for like 3 trips around the table after that. And that felt real bad. Whereas Taro, would have came into play before they would have got to that point, and that would have felt much better. I think Smuggler Share is still pretty good, but like the 3 mana does make a big difference sometimes.
3 mana is a huge difference. And again, like everybody draws cards no matter what. And the fact that Smothering Tithe hits the first card they draw during their draw step, which they've kind of gotten away from just in a design philosophy wise. Smothering Tithe will never happen again. It shouldn't ever happen again. There's a reason it's a game changer, because it's just generating such a crazy amount of value. It's hard to keep up with it. I think the other card too that just does this, it's a reason that Rhystic Study is a game changer. And also, Consecrated Sphinx, I think, kind of goes in the same vein, where it's a game changer, it's drawing you an inappropriate amount of cards, especially it's so far out of line with what your opponents could be doing anyways. And there's a reason that Rhystic Study also is super expensive. It's $50+, but also it's one of the most played cards in the format.
Yeah, and of course, at least in blue, there's a lot of spells that draw you cards, both instant or sorcery. We're not going to go into all of them because, there's 100 different cards that you could, play in your deck if you just want to draw some cards. Yeah. But if you want something on a permanent, on an enchantment, like Rhystic Study or at least on a body, Consecrated Sphinx, I've had pretty good luck with Insight. It's 2 and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever one of your opponents casts a green spell, you draw a card. We just got done talking about how much green you tend to see in Commander. Yes, it's no Rhystic Study, because Rhystic Study is a card that you always win. They either are getting taxed or they're drawing you cards, and both of those are great. Insight, it's not always going to generate you value, and you're occasionally going to hit a situation where no one's playing green, or they play green they'll hold back until they can remove it or something. But I've also drawn a ton of cards off Insight before too. So like it's no Rhystic Study, but don't underestimate how good it can absolutely be in some decks. Considering
that green is one of the most played colors in the format, Insight is a pretty safe include in a lot of your decks. I personally thought, Dana, I thought you were going to talk about Psychic Possession. That's the card that I know I've seen you play a whole bunch. And that does so much work. 2 blue for an enchantment. It's an enchant aura, so you enchant target opponent, but you skip your draw step. Downside there, but not really, because whenever enchanted opponent draws a card, you may draw a card. If you're playing against another blue player, if you're playing against somebody playing a Rhystic Study, you're going to get a ton of value off of this. It's a great way to... It doesn't keep up 1-for-1 with Consecrated Sphinx, but it still does a whole lot of work.
And you can usually tell who the player at the table is that's worth enchanting with this as well. Yeah, I've got a ton of value off it also. And it's also a kind of a fun, weird card. Same with Insight. Like, there are things you don't see that often, and that's worth something as well, I think, sometimes.
You're benefiting, you know the person you're going to hit with it.
Yeah,
that's usually pretty obvious by the time you're getting to turn 3 or 4. Having it come down and keep you on par with what the most powerful person draw-wise is doing, that's such a valuable effect.
Yeah. Well, since we're talking about like cards that should be seeing more play, this might be a good time to do some challenging of stats right now.
Yeah, this is a really good time. I think that I know Joey's not here to give us the proper challenge stats introduction, but there is indeed a lot of data out there, a lot of cards out there, and we just don't necessarily always agree with all the data out there. So we're going to take a second to break for challenge of stats, and we'll get right back into it.
This episode is brought to you by our favorite deck builder, Archidekt. Archidekt offers so many features to make your brewing experience super easy, from custom categories to helpful sorting methods and giving you tons of data about your deck too. Color breakdown, mana curve, but also things like your probability of drawing certain categories of cards at a certain time in the game, which I'm using to make sure that I have a better chance of drawing both my graveyard filling cards and my reanimation spells on time. Plus, their deck playtester is undeniably the best in the biz. Super intuitive game actions, from start phases to tapping groups of cards to copying tokens to proliferating all your counters, are all handled for you with a single keystroke. And I've got to shout out my all-time favorite feature, that when you're brewing on Archidekt, you can drag and drop a card from EDHREC or from Scryfall right into your deck list. This saves me so much time not having to type while I'm brewing. Even the way that they make importing a full deck list onto the site is super easy. And you know what? Archidekt even has a creators page that shows you when updates have been made to your favorite creators' decks, so you can see, for instance, what I'm trying out with my signature Baba list, or whatever new hipster strategy Dana is currently tinkering with. You can check out our deck lists linked in the description of every video at archidekt.com/EDHRECast. That's ARCHIDEKT.com/EDHRECast. Go get EDHREC'd at Archidekt.
So my challenge this week is brought to us by a listener, Mr. Necromancer. And he's got a big challenge for us today in Hirobi Death's Whale decks. And Hirobi is a very weird card with a capital W. She changes the rules of the game, and it causes a lot of unusual interactions with a large selection of cards. Now, there's a lot of cards on Hirobi's EDHREC page that could be substituted here for the card we're going to talk about, but to pick one out specifically, we're going to talk about Aphotic Wisps. And Aphotic Wisps is a single mana, 1 black for an instant. Target creature becomes black and gains fear until end of turn, and it draws you a card. Now, the way Hirobi works, whenever a creature becomes the target of a spell or ability to destroy that creature, the thought process here is you target it with a sufficient spell, and the creature's destroyed, then you draw a card to get something else back in your hand to make up for the spell you just cast. It's kind of a cantrip kill spell for a single mana. The problem is, it's kind of a non-bow. When a creature is targeted with Aphotic Wisps or whatever spell you have doing a similar thing, and Hirobi's out, the trigger happens and goes in the stack, and it destroys the target of the spell, and then the spell tries to find its target, and it can't because it's already been destroyed, so it fizzles. So you don't actually get the cantrip off this effect. That's not to say it can't be good, but there's a lot of ways to destroy something in a Hirobi deck already that are better than cards like this that people are only running because they think they're getting the cantrip that they're actually not getting off it. So if you're running a Hirobi deck and you're running these spells specifically because you think you can kill something and get a cantrip, it doesn't really work that way, and you should probably look at all of the other options that Hirobi decks run that actually will work correctly and not require you to run kind of bad cards that aren't going to actually work where you think they are.
Yeah, the timing around all of that is super important to pay attention to. So this is a really, really good challenge here. I'm going to get to mine, though, real quick. And mine is pretty simple and straightforward. It's not a really flashy or fun card to talk about, but I'm going to talk about it in a commander that I think needs it pretty bad. And that is Kotus the Fangkeeper. It's 1 in Sultai colors. It's a 2/1 with Indestructible, and then whenever Kotus deals combat damage to a player, exile a top X cards of their library, where X is the amount of damage dealt, and you can play any number of spells with mana value X or less from among them without paying their mana costs. And so this is a commander that is super, super bent on interacting and dealing combat damage. And there's a lot of cards that they're getting played in a few decks, but not very many. And the ones that I really want to call attention to that I think are just super, super valuable are going to be cards like Trailblazer's Boots. They're going to be cards like Whisper Silk Cloak that give you a way to guarantee you're dealing combat damage. And there's a few of these effects out there. People are already playing Aqueous Form at a pretty high rate, which is kind of fun to see. But Trailblazer's Boots, it gives an equipped creature non-basic land walk. It's an equipment for only 2 mana. But another one that it's not fun to talk about because it's just so old, but Whisper Silk Cloak. It's 3 mana and says equipped creature can't be blocked and has Shroud. Now, yes, Kotus is indestructible, but there's still so much exile-based removal in the format still. Giving it Shroud is still going to be a super, super important piece of protection. And also, if players want to go for Silver Shroud Costume, that's another great one that is able to flash in and give just a one-time protection with Shroud, and then also gives Kotus the ability to not be blocked. There's a lot of just really valuable protection pieces, but just the big thing is make sure you're giving evasion to Kotus so that he's dealing combat damage every single turn. Such an important piece. Most of these cards are only played in about 10% of decks, and you need a density of those to make sure you're seeing them every single game. Yes, giving it Trample is fine. People playing Rancor in over 69% of decks. That's well and good, but you still can get chump blocked, and Kotus is only at 2 power naturally. So there's going to be a bunch of big chump blockers out there. I don't think that's what you really want to be doing. So make sure you're going for just the straight unblockable if you're building Kotus. I think that's the direction you want to make sure you're doing. So everybody, if you're building Kotus, Whisper Silk Cloak, Silver Shroud Costume, all those fun pieces, play them a little bit more.
And Challenge of Stats has been brought to you today by Cardsphere.com, our favorite way to turn unplayed cards into played cards. You simply send out cards you don't want to use to Cardsphere users and get credit back that you can use to get cards from other people that they aren't using. You can also deposit money directly into your account and get cards that way. We use Cardsphere all the time to build decks we're brewing, and it's a fantastic way to pick up pieces of cardboard for whatever it is that you are brewing. Just go to cardsphere.com/EDHRECast and start swapping cards today.
All right, Dana, let's get back into the main topic, because there's a ton of game changers out there. We haven't even gotten nearly into a dent, really, when you think about it. But there's a bunch of other cards I want to make sure we get to today. The first one that we want to start with is Jeska's Will in this back half of the show. Jeska's Will is really, really hard to duplicate. It's such a powerful effect all around. And it's wild to me. Jeska's Will was just a cheap card for a non-zero amount of time when it was first released. But people caught on, and they caught up, and boy, did this card get showing up in all sorts of decks.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe the best red draw spell printed ever. I don't know if that's 100% true, but like, you can definitely make an argument for it. The fact that it like gives you cards and gives you the mana to actually play those cards is absurd. And nothing else does that. Nothing else is giving you the mana and giving you the cards. But again, if you're looking for like something to somewhat get you there, I never feel bad about casting Light Up the Stage. Spectacle cost on it is a red, otherwise it costs 2 and a red, which still isn't a terrible rate. And you exile the top 2 cards of your library, and until the end of your next turn, which is oftentimes really relevant here, you can play those cards. So I mean, even if you hit 2 lands, well, it's going to hit your land drop this turn and your land drop next turn. For a single red mana, that's really good. I'm just a fan of this. You know, yeah, you have to swing through to cast it for the spectacle cost, but like, what red deck isn't swinging out pretty regularly? That's just what red's doing. I'm sure I've cast it for the full cost at some point in time, but very, very rarely. It's almost always a single red to get me 2 cards.
There's a lot of cards in this category that I think it reduces our dependency on Jeska's Will for any sort of just routine card draw in red. Ren's Resolve is a really, really good one. I think that there's a couple cards out there. Just impulse draw, 2 cards, get them out there just quick and efficient. The downside is they're not giving you mana the same way that Jeska's Will does. That's such a huge, huge difference in what just the power level of Jeska's Will. A card that I think gets close when you're flashing it back, but then it also costs 8 mana to flashback, is Ignite the Future. That's 4 mana, so 3 in a red, 4 sorcery, exile the top 3 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you can play those cards. And if the spell was cast from the graveyard, you can play those cards without paying their mana cost. So it does get pretty expensive, but good lord, this card, it's really hard to get apples to apples with Jeska's Will, because it's getting you 3 cards, but it's also getting you the mana. You can't get close to it. And this one, I think the gap is significantly bigger between Jeska's Will and the other cards that we're suggesting you can play, just because Jeska's Will is just that good.
Although I would say, had this been a situation, 3 or 4 years ago, red's gotten so much good draw in the last couple of years. It's a little bit less painful now than it would have been. You mentioned a couple spells, Ren's Resolve being one. Embrace the Unknown, really solid for 3 mana.
Love that one. Yeah.
Top 2 cards of your library, and it has Retrace, which is really useful.
Yeah, I love Embrace the Unknown. That one's been that's been a star whenever I've gotten to see it.
Ensnared by the Mara for 4 mana. Each opponent faces a villainous choice, and man, I've seen them take a ton of damage from that, and if they give you the card that you can then cast for free, that's a lot of value as well. So things are less dire in terms of red's card advantage today than it was even a couple of years back.
Yeah.
When this would have been a real painful loss for a lot of red decks.
Yeah, for sure. Jeska's Will, like I said, just to introduce the card, it's wild to me that people slept on this card when it was first revealed. They was like, I mean, it's 3 mana, you only get 3 cards, you play them this turn. No, this card's amazing, and you have the mana to cast them. Yeah, Jeska's Will, this one's really, really hard to replace, but there are at least some options that are going to get you that card advantage, which is the important part in casting Jeska's Will.
Since we're talking about really busted draw spells, Ad Nauseam, 3 double black for an instant, reveal cards from the top of your library and put that card into your hand, and you lose life equal to the converted mana cost of that card. And you can repeat this process any number of times. So you're going to hit some amount of lands that are going to cost you no life. If your deck is really efficient, you're going to, be losing 1 or 2 life per card. Like, this is a really easy way to put a ton of cards into your hand at the cost of some amount of life. Find the combo piece you're looking for. I mean, it's a CEDH staple for a reason, but like, there's a lot of decks where it's just a really good way to put a ton of cards into your hand.
Yeah, it's super powerful. It gets less powerful when you're playing a more socially focused deck, I would say.
Yes.
This one, it is a game changer. In those high power, in those CEDH, the bracket 4 and 5 decks, Ad Nauseam is a powerhouse. I think that power definitely trails off significantly the higher your mana curve gets, and just kind of the more socially, because you're not playing those hyper efficient cantrips, your fast mana and all that stuff. So there becomes less air to draw that you really want to make Ad Nauseam powerful.
Yeah, the cards we've been talking about are cards that like tend to see play at high levels as well as lower levels. I mean, Rhystic Study is clearly a busted CEDH card, but like I've seen plenty of them pop up in bracket 3 decks. Before the bracket system, even in like really lower power pods, people would just crack Rhystic Study in a pack and put it into their lower power deck because it's like such a good draw effect.
Yeah.
Ad Nauseam doesn't really work that way. Like it's mostly showing up in appropriate places. Bracket 4, bracket 5. But, you know, if you were someone who was playing it in your really hyper efficient deck in bracket 3, maybe you need to replace it. And there's a couple things that maybe get you there. Necrologia is the first one I think of. 3 and double black for an instant. You can only cast it during your end step. But as an additional cost, you can pay X life and draw X cards. So like 5 mana, if you want to spend 10, 12, 15 life, you can put that many cards into your hand as a one-shot instant effect end of your turn.
Yeah, there's a few types of this effect, whether it's Stinging Study, Peer into the Abyss, I know is another one that a lot of people like to play, where you're trading off, you know, half Peer into the Abyss, for example, that's 7 mana. Target player draws cards equal to half the number of cards in the library, and you lose half their life, and you round up each time. A great way to just have a huge infusion of cards. But yeah, Necrologia has a lot of vibes of Necropotence, which is also a game changer.
Yeah.
It's also a super powerful draw effect. And so if you're looking to get away from Ad Nauseam and Necropotence, there's just so many all over the place in black, especially because that's kind of what they do. The Dana, that's what you do as a brewer, is
for sure.
trade life for cards. It's a resource. But yeah, Ad Nauseam, especially in more socially focused decks, I don't know how many people were trying to replace that anyways, because I mean, if I cast Ad Nauseam and I draw a Sun Titan, I mean, that's 6 damage right off the bat, and that's like more life than I wanted to spend at all. So the ratio for Ad Nauseam can be a little rough sometimes in social decks.
Yeah. In all these cards, like you mentioned Necropotence, similarly, Bolas of Citadel, like Ad Nauseam, Bolas of Citadel, Necropotence.
Yeah, that whole class of cards.
Doing very, very similar things. And Necrologia, Peer into the Abyss, whatever, can sub for all of those, at least somewhat at lower power levels.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't we get to the next one? And this one, Dan, I don't know about you. This one was a real head scratcher for me when it was added to the game changers. And there's not really a whole lot that you can do, I guess, to replace crop rotation if you're trying to keep a deck in bracket 2. So crop rotation, 1 green for an instant as initial cost. To cast the spell, you sacrifice a land and search your library for a land card, put that on the battlefield, then shuffle. There's a few options, I guess. But I don't really know if this effect is game changer quality either, though.
Well, yeah, what's particularly weird about this card is it is a game changer, I would argue, because you can go get Field of the Dead and Gaea's Cradle, and
which are game changers
and
themselves.
Tabernacle, Pendrell Vale, and all the cards that you would go get with it that feel broken are cards that are also game changers. So I feel like it's a card that makes sense as a game changer until you realize the top 10 targets for it are also all game changers for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if you are actually looking for replacements, you're playing some Lands Matter deck, I think the 2 options that stand out the most to me are going to be Urza's Cave, which is new land. I know you've been having a lot of success with, Dana.
Yeah.
You can tap it for a colorless, and you can pay 3 and tap it to sacrifice Urza's Cave, search your library for a land card, then put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And then Sylvan Scrying. That's just kind of the oldie but goodie. 1 and a green, search your library for a land, put it in your hand. It's pretty straightforward from there. But granted, it doesn't get those onto the battlefield. It doesn't do it at instant speed, I think, is kind of a dubious thing with crop rotation, being able to sacrifice a basic land, fetch up a Glacial Chasm to fog your opponents. But again, Glacial Chasm is a game changer.
It's a game changer,
I don't know if crop rotation is doing game changery things, or if it's just, like you said, the lands are the game changers and crop rotation is just a way to get them.
Yeah, as long as those lands all remain game changers, this feels less impactful on this list. But, you know, if it's something you want to go get those game changer lands, there's a couple of options that we just named that will kind of get you there.
Yeah, still a super powerful effect. We're not trying to discount crop rotation.
No, for sure.
But standing on its own, I don't know how much it's doing. But one card that I know does stand on its own, and one card that just It's super powerful. Every time I've seen it, it's made a huge difference in the game, is Deflecting Swat. So that is 2 and a red for an instant. And if you control your commander, you can cast the spell without paying its mana cost. And then you may choose new targets for target spell or ability. Just a way to, like I said earlier about all these Teferi's protection replacements, being able to cast these things for free and then saving something, such a hugely powerful effect.
You know, in the first one that kind of jumps out at me here is Bolt Bend. 3 and a red, change target of target spell or ability with a single target. However, this spell costs 3 less to cast if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So like if you are in a deck that routinely has big bodies out, single red mana for a Deflecting Swat is a pretty good replacement. Although I would wager if you're running Deflecting Swat, there was probably a decent chance you already had Bolt Bend in the deck as well.
Probably. I mean, but you said if you're playing a deck with anything with big creatures in there. So basically, if you're playing any of my decks, Bolt Bend is only going to cost you 1 red mana.
Yeah.
This is such an easy fit in so many different decks. And it does the exact same thing, changing the target of a spell or ability with a single target. Mm-hmm. This is so great.
So another one, 3 mana for Will's Reversal isn't as good as 1 mana or free, but like 3 isn't a terrible price for an instant speed spell. And you have to roll a 20-sided dice, and if you roll 1 through 14, you may choose new targets for that spell or ability. So the worst case scenario is you get to retarget it somewhere else. For 3 mana, that can be pretty useful. If you roll a 15 or more, however, you choose new targets for that spell or ability, and then you copy it. So, a quarter of the time you retarget that spell, which is what you wanted to do, and you copy it and shoot the copy somewhere else and get even extra value out of it. So you have to leave mana free here in this case, 3 of it, but that's a pretty solid spell whose worst case scenario is doing Deflecting Swat stuff.
I mean, but also Deflecting Swat's face mana value is 3 mana. So it's basically, at worst, it's Deflecting Swat without the clause that you can cast it for free if you control your commander. At best, it's doing a little bit more. So I do really like Will's Reversal. I forgot this was even a card. So this is a really good way to dig this up, Dana. Because, if you get the Deflecting Swat, but then you roll a really good roll, getting to pick something else off at the same time, that is a huge deal.
That's just how deep the pool of cards for Baldur's Gate is, honestly. That like this one is an easy one to forget. I mean, leave it to the EDHRECast to talk about Baldur's Gate 4 years after its release. But I mean, that is true. Like this set was just juiced with so many gems that we're finding 4 years later. Yep, absolutely.
So what about another red card then, Dana? So we talked about Deflecting Swat. What about Underworld Breach? So that is the modern powerhouse. It's a combo card for 1 and a red. Enchantment says each non-land card in your graveyard has escape, and the escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. And then at the beginning of your end step, you sacrifice Underworld Breach. So it's a great way to recur a whole bunch of stuff. It's kind of your Yawgmoth Will in red. And I know you love Yawgmoth's Will type of effects.
I do. And because it's in red, it's really tough to replicate. And it's non-land card, so like it just hits almost everything. Again, this is a card where like the CEDH power level of it is a much different thing than the casual power level of it. Yeah. Because the things you're recurring probably have a higher mana value. You're not like bringing 3 or 4 things back like you might be in a really high powered meta. But there's some things that kind of do a similar impression here. Past in Flames, I think people have kind of forgotten about. It was once a real powerhouse. Mm-hmm. Each instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback till end of turn, and the flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. And you can also flash it back. That's really solid for particularly if you like have a deck that has a lot of efficient or cheap instant or sorcery spells. If you're playing in Boros, that feels all right to cast that and be able to fire off that Swords to Plowshares is already sitting in there, or that Lightning Bolt, or that Wear and Tear, or whatever it winds up being. So you can get a lot of value off that, even though it's only hitting instant or sorceries. Yeah,
another version of Past in Flames is Mizzix's Mastery. I really do like Mizzix's Mastery. Yeah, the face value of it, paying 4 mana to just exile target card that's instant or sorcery from your graveyard, and that's fine. That's whatever. But when you overload it, that's when you really get into this is doing some super powerful, super combo-y type of things where you're just exiling every instant sorcery in your graveyard. You get to cast them for free. That's where you get into some really powerful effects. Now, if you're playing at the CEDH, Mizzix's Mastery probably is not a bracket 4, bracket 5 card, but also you're looking to replace Game Changers, means you're probably not looking to play in bracket 4, bracket 5. But Underworld Breach, yeah, Past in Flames is a really good example of this too, where especially in Modern, but also in Commander, Past in Flames was the Underworld Breach before we got Underworld Breach.
Right.
And so just reverting back and just rewinding back to before Theros Beyond Death came out, it's a good way to kind of get that same effect. But yeah, there is nothing really that gives all of your non-land cards. That's a huge distinction you pointed out there, Dana.
Yep.
Where you're able to...
I've seen people like straight up scoop to an overloaded Mythic's Mastery because they're like, oh, you've got 45 cards in your graveyard and I've seen what half of them are. I know they're all instants or sorceries. I'm just not going to recover from that. So let's call it a game. Like it can just like straight up win games sometimes.
An overloaded Mythic's Mastery has won me several games.
Yeah.
If you get an overloaded Mythic's Mastery to resolve, you should win the game because that's right. Hey, that's 8 mana for one. But
sure.
There's a lot of value that goes into that too.
So let's go to our next kind of free spell from that cycle we've been talking about here. Fierce Guardianship, 2 and a blue. If you control your commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost and counter a target non-creature spell. I guess Force of Will probably is in the same kind of bucket.
Yeah, that needs to go in the same category.
Free counter spells as well. And there's a few obvious ones here. Force of Negation, Pact of Negation that see play in other Eternal formats that are really, really good cards and are not in this list.
But those are expensive. Those are expensive, though.
Yeah, if you are playing a deck that has both Fierce Guardianship and Force of Will, I feel like you probably are already running Force of Negation and Pact of Negation in those decks, but maybe not.
Yeah. I mean, if you're at a lower power level, if you're more on the social side of the format, you still do have some options. You have some pretty good ones actually too. If you need something that you're planning on tapping out every single turn, you need ways to protect everything. I know Foil is one that kind of gets ignored, but if you've played Pauper before, you can't forget about Foil. That's such a good card. It's 2 and 2 blue. For an instant, says you may discard an island card and another card rather than pay this spell's mana cost, and then you counter target spell. So the cost is a little bit more than Force of Will. You can't just exile any card or any blue card in your hand. You have to discard an island as well, but they're also going to your graveyard. So if you are playing some graveyard strategies, sometimes that's better than having to exile a card from your hand because then you're never going to get it back. Yeah,
but like in a mono blue deck, you probably almost always have an island in your hand for the most part, particularly if you're drawing any amount of cards like blue tends to do. And like, yes, that's a fairly steep cost. You're ditching an island, you're ditching something else, and you are losing the foil. It's 3 cards to stop one spell, but like
it's not nothing.
If you are surgically using this to keep a game from ending, it's worth it. Like it's worth that cost in a lot of situations to keep something from happening that's worth counterspelling.
Yeah, for sure. Another one along the same lines, Thwart, I know is a really good one. I played this a little bit when I had my landfall deck, where the alternative cost to counter target spell is you may return 3 islands you control to their owner's hand instead of paying Thwart's mana cost. If you want to bounce 3 islands and you can replay them for 3 more landfall triggers, that's okay with me. So yeah, Thwart, actually, if you're playing a landfall deck, Thwart is great because it's going to get you more landfall triggers going through. It probably should be played more.
And like, forget, replaying those islands. Like maybe you don't care. Maybe you are the person about to win the game. Yeah. And like you're stopping someone from stopping you, right? Like, well, I don't care if I have to bounce 3 islands. I'm going to win the game right now. Yeah. Or I'm swinging through with some amount of creatures or whatever it is. Like there's a lot of situations where, you don't even care if you're bouncing those 3 islands because like the game is not going to last long enough. It matters.
Well, and another thing too that came up and it was super relevant when I was playing this, Mystic Sanctuary is an island. You can pick up Mystic Sanctuary and then replay it and then get Thwart back into your hand. So there's a lot of really, really cool play with Thwart. Everybody sees 3 islands, and 3 islands is a lot. If you're playing a 3-color deck, you probably won't have 3 islands you can routinely pick up and replay. But if you're playing a 2-color deck, you absolutely should be able to pull this off.
Absolutely. And one more here that might work as well is Mindbreak Trap. 2 and double blue. If an opponent casts 3 or more spells this turn, you can spend 0 mana to cast Mindbreak Trap, and then you exile any number of target spells. So like, again, CEDH, where like the stack gets real deep. This is a much stronger card, but like, I don't know, there's plenty of times in casual Commander where you get 3 things in a stack, and this lets you exile all of them for free. There's some situations that's really, really solid. For sure. It's kind of like a Flusterstorm type of card where you win target counter spell war. Really valuable. Yep. And it's anything you can cast for free is super, super important to keep around. So I agree with this, Dana. Next, we'll go into the Green Tutor. Worldly Tutor is Green's version of Enlightened Tutor. Search your library for creature card, reveal it, and shuffle and put it on top. Green's got quite a few creature tutor options here.
Yes, they do.
None of them are as good, obviously, but like similarly to Demonic and Vampiric Tutor in black, there's a lot of stuff you can pick that's a weaker version of it, but like there's, probably a dozen different things you can pick, whether it's Green Sun's Zenith or Eldrami's Call, that will get you that creature card and either put it on top of your library or put it into your hand.
Yeah, I mean, Eladamri's Call, like it's the same argument that we had for Idyllic Tutor over Enlightened Tutor that applies here, because Eladamri's Call, search your library for a creature card, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. You don't have to put it on top of your library like Worldly Tutor does. All those same arguments are just going to apply right here. And same with Green Sun Zenith and Finale of Devastation, another one of my personal favorites. Those are putting those things onto the battlefield. And so, yes, you have to pay a little bit more because it is X and the green cost in there. But man, putting something straight on the battlefield is super valuable. There's a lot to like. And Worldly Tutor, yes, we're not saying it's not powerful, but it is very replaceable in my mind.
Mm-hmm. I think next we'll go to a couple of these lands here. Gaea's Cradle, come on. Like, it's one of the most busted lands ever printed. One
of the most powerful cards ever printed.
Yeah, easily. Add a green to your mana pool for each creature you control. I mean, nothing replaces it. The price reflects that. But like, there's stuff that does a okay impression. Growing Rites of Itlimoc, when flipped over, is technically a better Gaea's Cradle because it can tap for colorless mana if there's no creatures in play. So like that's a pretty solid replacement. Nykthos, I think, is, if anything, might be slightly underrated. People know it's good, but like Nykthos has won me a lot of games by like just doubling the amount of mana I'm making because I have a handful of permanents in play.
I mean, I struggle to think that people are underrating Nykthos because it is still a $40 card, but it is super good. And if you need a replacement for a $1,000 card,
it's absolutely right. Yeah,
$40 is a bargain. Let's be real. But yeah, Growing Rites of Itlimoc is my favorite way to replace Gaea's Cradle, at least, because the front side coming down, you get to grab a creature, put on there, and then you can transform it later. Super valuable. I really like that. Circle of Dreams Druid is another one that has the ability where you can tap it, add green for each creature you control. Granted, it is triple green, so it is kind of hard to pull off in multicolored decks a little bit, but it's also kind of doing this. Well, not kind of. It is doing the same thing.
Right. In Serra's Sanctum, Gaea's Cradle for enchantments, maybe not as good, but still busted.
But still really good,
Yeah. And again, Nykthos can sub in there, maybe even a little bit easier than it can for Gaea's Cradle, because this is an enchantment deck, so like it's a little more versatile there. Also, you have Sanctum Weaver as a creature, kind of the version of Circle of Dreams Druid. Add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of enchantments you control, and it itself is also an enchantment. So like worst case scenario, it's making you a mana even if you have no other enchantments in play, but that's not how it works in any deck that it's going to be in. It's going to be tapping for all of the mana.
Yeah, I think this is a better place to vouch for Nykthos as a replacement, because a lot of times too, when you have enchantments, some of the most powerful enchantments that you might be trying to drop down are going to have double mana pips in their cost. And so, yeah, if you're able to kind of effectively double the mana for each of your enchantments, that's super powerful. This is where I think Nykthos actually shines maybe a little bit more than Serra's Sanctum, because it's so much easier to get double your mana for each enchantment because of the devotion that is inherently built into having enchantments on the battlefield.
Yeah. Since we're talking really super strong lands, I guess we might as well mention Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. It's a land that says all creatures basically get, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature unless you pay a colorless mana. There's not a lot of these out there in decks, but if you are playing one and you need to pull it out, and I just can't imagine that's a situation that occurs very often, but as an enchantment, Pendrell Mist does the same thing for 3 and a blue. Each creature gains during your upkeep, pay 1 or destroy this creature. So like there's literally an enchantment that's the exact same thing, and if you have access to blue, that will do what Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale will do.
So this is a type of effect, especially when you're putting on any permanent that's going to stick around and that happens every single turn. Socially, not just power level wise, socially, you're going to get so many dirty looks. So if you don't want your tires slashed, but you still want something like this, I found that Fade Away is actually a really, really good replacement for that. So Fade Away is a one-time effect of this. And so it's 2 and a blue for a sorcery. For each creature, that creature's controller pays 1 colorless mana or sacrifices a permanent. So this is a good way to clear the board, make sure people have a chance to opt out, but at the same time, if you're playing this type of effect, just play a board wipe. Just play a Wrath anyways, because having something put so much downward pressure on the game like a Tabernacle, that's the part where it's not just the power level, it's the social level of what it's doing to everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And again, there's a reason Tabernacle is the price that it is. Like having that effect staple to a land is crazy powerful.
Yeah, it's not fun to dig out from.
Yep. So to stay in the same theme of lands, we mentioned Glacial Chasm earlier. It's a land with cumulative upkeep, pay 2 life. It does not tap for mana, but when it comes into play, you have to sacrifice a land, and creatures you control can attack. That's just all downsides. Why would you play that? Well, prevent all damage that will be dealt to you is why you would play that. Like, it's just a perfect shield to hide behind, and that's why it's a game changer.
Yeah, you get to pillow fort behind it and hide for a little bit. It's super powerful, especially when you crop rotation it in. But again, is that crop rotation's problem, or is that Glacial Chasm's problem? But there are some ways you can get around it. The biggest one is Maze of Ith, where you get to fog a creature that's attacking you and just pull it right out of combat. Dana, I know you love older cards too. Core Haven, also a really good one, has the ability to add for 1 colorless. Or you can pay 1 and a white, tap it, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt by target attacking creature this turn. So you only fog it, you don't pull it out of combat, but you can block it and make sure it's a block that's going to kill it, not your blocker too. Yeah.
Again, none of those do nearly what Glacial Chasm does, but if you want a land that can save you from a little bit of damage, those do. The best you're going to do are those 2 particular lands for that kind of effect for sure.
Yeah, probably. So
I think the next one we want to talk about here is Drannith Magistrate, a very controversial card from back in Ikoria. 1 and a white, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hand, which seems like that's going to, hit graveyard stuff and spells in exile, whatever, but like primarily it just keeps people from casting their commander.
Yeah, this is the one, if we want to talk about cards that are socially going to ruin things for people, Drannith Magistrate is a really good way to make sure that people don't want to play more games with you if you're on the social end of the format.
And what's interesting here, though, is actually, I think, an argument can be made that maybe some of the replacements work a little bit better. The problem with Magistrate is it shuts everyone out from casting their commander, and sometimes you want people to be able to cast their commander to help you out with somebody else who's a problem. So there are situations where Magistrate makes everybody mad at you.
Yeah.
Paints a bullseye on your back. Whereas like something like Nevermore, for example, 1 double white.
Yeah.
When it enters the battlefield, you name an on-land card and that card can't be cast.
Yep.
Well, you can focus that on the person who's the problem with the problem commander while not drawing the ire of the other 2 players.
At some point too, Drannith Magistrate, it's kind of the example that I know you like to use, Dana, where you're using a hand grenade when sometimes you need a scalpel. You need to be a little more surgical, a little more precise with how you're taking things out. Because also, too, you're going to need allies in any given game. You can't just... I know some people hate playing the political side of Commander, but sometimes you need to. And Nevermore is a way to get around that. It's not making enemies from 3 people. It's making an enemy from 1 person.
Yep. Gideon's Intervention kind of does a similar thing, 2 and double white for an enchantment. You choose a card name, and your opponents can't cast spells with a chosen name, so you presumably will pick that commander, keep it off the battlefield. But you can also pick something else, and you would prevent all damage that would be dealt to you by permanents you control by sources with that chosen name. So, Nevermore only works if the thing hasn't been cast already, or if you have a way to put it back in the command zone or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Gideon's Intervention, if the thing's already in play, it still gives you the option to name that thing and have it not deal damage to you. So particularly if someone's playing a Voltron deck or whatever it is, it's already in play and suited up. Well, Nevermore doesn't do you any good. Drannith Magistrate doesn't do you any good in that situation. Gideon's Intervention does. You can just choose the name of that Voltron creature and it's not going to deal damage to you as long as Intervention's in play.
Yeah, Gideon's Intervention, now that we're talking about it, I just forgot how good it was for a little bit there. And yes, it does make an enemy, and I know people don't always love explicitly making an enemy, but it's such a powerful thing because, like you pointed out, that thing can be on the battlefield, and you're just going to fog their commander that they're winning with combat damage with that game.
Yeah.
I know a card that it's also pretty old, and I don't know if it's necessarily the best tool, but Null Chamber is another card in the same vein, 3 and a white. You and target opponent each name any card except a basic land, and those cards can't be played. So you do give your opponent an opportunity to maybe lock you out too. That's maybe not the best way to go about winning a game, but it is an option there too if you're trying to find just a density of these replacement effects. But again, none of these are as intense as Drannith Magistrate, but sometimes that could be for the best because you're not making 3 enemies all at the same time.
Yeah. And to go back to Gideon's intervention for 1 second too, I have it in a deck of mine, and I use it on my own spell. I use it on whatever, it's in my Pestilence deck, and I use it on whatever Pestilence effect I have.
Yeah.
That way it doesn't deal damage. It's already in place, so I don't worry about the casting it portion, and I don't take damage. Like there's situations where that's useful for you to do as well.
I mean, that feels really niche, but it's also really smart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good call there. So I want to get to a category too. There's a little bundle of cards. There's all these blue tutors. And so we've talked about Worldly Tutor, we've talked about Enlightened Tutor, but Mystical Tutor, but then two other cards that are recently game changers. One because it got unbanned and one because it got moved up. But Gifts Ungiven and Intuition, I think, are all three cards that need to be talked about in the same vein because they're all doing similar things.
Merchant Scroll, search your library for a blue instant card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Mystical Tutor will get you an instant or sorcery card at instant speed. This is a sorcery and it costs one more, but it goes to your hand and gets you an instant. That's, if you are playing that kind of deck that wants that specific thing, Merchant Scroll will get you there pretty efficiently.
Yeah.
And you also have Personal Tutor as a sorcery speed. Again, search your library for a sorcery card, reveal it, and put it on top. So if you just want that effect really efficiently, Merchant Scroll and Personal Tutor will get you part of the way there.
Yeah, Merchant Scroll, once again, putting that card into your hand. Personal Tutor puts it on top of the library. Still doing roughly the same thing. Where again, if something's putting it on the top of your library versus putting it in your hand, that's a big difference. Now, you are in blue. It's a little easier to draw cards routinely. So Mystical Tutor has that downside wiped out a little bit. But I love being able to put these things into my hand. So Personal Tutor, not quite what I want to do, but Merchant Scroll is. Another cards that I think are in the same vein, that's probably the more fixed version of this, is Solve the Equation. That's the easiest way, I think, for people to just pull out Mystical Tutor, put in Solve the Equation. It's 2 and a blue for sorcery. Search for an instant or sorcery, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. It's quick and easy right there. That's the kind of the immediate one that I would go to if I'm looking to replace any of these cards.
Yeah, you have a couple other like Waterlogged Teachings, which is one of the TFC lands we got fairly recently, but you have to be in Dimir to do that. And if you're in Dimir, you have access to Black's Tutor Suite as well. So like, it's useful because it's on the back of the land, but not sure how amazing that is necessarily when you have access to Black. But like, there are maybe not as many options as there are to replace Demonic and Vampiric Tutor, but there's quite a few options here in blue that will get you part of the way there if you need to replace Mystical Tutor or Intuition or Gifts Ungiven.
Yeah, I mean, I like Mystical Teachings too, but again, you're also in Dimir there, so
you're in Black,
maybe it doesn't quite apply. You just play whatever tutors you want anyways, but there are other ways. And yeah, Gifts Ungiven and Intuition, they're maybe not quite apples to apples with all these comparisons here, because, I mean, Gifts is a whole world class above Mystical Tutor in my mind, because it's able to grab any card. It's putting some of those in the graveyard. Sometimes you want those in the graveyard. So there's a lot to go on there. And then Intuition, kind of the same thing.
So what's the last one we want to talk about here, Matt?
I mean, so the last one, Kinnan Bonder Prodigy. I mean, this one feels super, super powerful. It's that Simic Commander. Whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type that it produced. So you're basically doubling your mana. And there's a lot of different ways that you can double your mana in all sorts of things. Now, you can't really replace the activated ability where pay 7 mana, look at top 5 cards and put a non-human creature onto the battlefield. That's a little harder to replace on the same card. But if you're looking for the ways to just double your mana, you have a ton of ways to do that.
Yeah, if that's your primary concern, Mana Reflection especially gets you there as an enchantment. If you tap permanent for mana, it produces twice as much. Nyxbloom Ancient, if you tap permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much on a creature. A little more fragile, a little more expensive, but like, if that hits the field and you are able to untap with it in play, you're probably going to just create so much value that no one else will be able to catch back up to you.
Yeah, and even if you want something that's going to affect the early game, you still have some options. I know Leyline of Abundance is a way that if it's in your opening hand, it's going to hit the battlefield for free, and that's just an easy way to tap a creature for mana, taps it for an additional green, and then you have a chance to put plus counters on all your creatures too. And I know Vernal Bloom is another old card that's going to double the mana that your forests make. So there isn't like a 1-for-1 way, but there isn't with a ton of these cards that we've been talking about today.
Right.
But Kinnan Bonder Prodigy, I feel like that's the one that's maybe the easiest to find something that does something similar, or maybe even go over the top of it even.
Yeah. Green, just making mana. You are in access to the colors to make mana. There's a handful of untap options as well. If like you're looking to double your mana in both green and blue, or even things like High Tide in blue, where
Yeah.
you're tapping for extra mana. You have Early Harvest in green to untap your lands. Just a couple other options in green that untap lands as well. So like there are things that will kind of get you there if that's the main concern with why you're running Kinnan.
Just not for 2 mana, which is kind of the problem with Kinnan.
Absolutely.
It goes in the command zone. It's only 2 mana to get down. That's where Kinnan really earns its keep as being a game changer type of commander.
Well, I think we went through most of the ones that have like replacements that are worth really delving into here.
Yeah, for sure. There's obviously a bunch of other cards. There's 61 game changers. We just wanted to cover as many as we could, really, because there's obviously cards that are going to be pretty hard to replace with non-game changer stuff like, I don't know, an Emrakul, something that's banned. But like, even if they made Emrakul unbanned, it's really hard to reproduce what Emrakul Aeon's Torn would be able to do.
Yeah, we avoided most of the commanders here, particularly because they're like just your deck tends to be built around all of those ones that are game changers, and you're really limited in what you can do to replace those for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, are there any other cards that you kind of wish we had replacements for that are game changers? There's so many out there that I want to play this type of effects, but man, it's really hard to be nice about it too.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the thing. Like when you look at them, you're like, oh, what am I going to replace these with? It does the same thing. And I'm like, well, maybe I'm better off. Maybe we're all better off if there isn't such a perfect replacement for a lot of these cards. It makes you have to make harder choices and, play a little more carefully than it does when every deck can just easily have a Teferi's Protection in it or something, or every deck can just easily have something like Jeska's Will that generates that much value, or a Smothering Tithe. Like having to find creative workarounds, I think tends to make for a little bit more interesting brews.
Yeah, or something's doing something super, super like niche and specific. Like I don't want there to be a replacement for Food Chain. Right. We have enough combo decks out there, so like we don't need a replacement for Food Chain. We have the one that's all we ever will need.
Yeah.
So with all that said, let's wrap up this episode. I had a good time getting to go through all of these and just finding ways to make sure we're getting these effects without kind of getting into game changer territory, because everybody deserves a chance to get these types of effects. Definitely need them in the format.
Yeah, right, for sure. And this lets you, if you are somebody who found some game changers got added a couple of weeks back and you're like, oh man, my deck got bumped up to a bracket, it shouldn't be at, doing a 1v1 swap can put things back down where, it feels a little more appropriate to play. And hopefully some of these will help people fix that.
Yeah, absolutely. So listeners, let us know in the comments out there, what are some replacements for game changers that you've been finding yourself putting into your decks? There's a ton of game changers out there, which hopefully means there's a ton of cards you can let us know about that could be replacing other game changers out there in the world. So let us know in the comments. We definitely want to hear from you all. But with that, I think it's time to wrap up this episode. So Dana, where can everybody find you out there on social media?
You can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm writing articles for EDHREC, and you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And you can find me at pretty much any social media platform that's at Mathimus55, MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, we are proud to work together with Dragon Shield to provide some of the best accessories for protecting your decks, some of the best ways to organize your decks and the rest of your collection. And so make sure you check out Dragon Shield for all of that over there. But with that, we are going to sign off this week. So if you have any data, some keen insights, as Joy loves to say, give us an email, give us a shout on social media. But with that, we'll see you next week, everybody. And until then, don't forget to EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.